recently expressed alarm over one of the Middle East's most treasured historical sites. They reported that the ancient city of Palmyra, Syria, home of 2,000-year-old ruins and a UN World Heritage Site, is currently under threat as Islamic State forces move in, fighting against government troops in the area. At this point, the militants have been held at bay, but the destruction and the looting of antiquities is one of the turmoil's many casualties. NewsHour special correspondent Marcia Biggs reports tonight on the fight to save them. It's part of our series, Culture at Risk.
It's as stark as night and day, this satellite photo before the war began and after. Both are from the ancient city of Apamea. Founded in 300 BC, it was a hub of commerce and culture in the Roman era, and it boasted one of the largest theaters of the ancient world. Today it is pockmarked with craters, evidence of massive looting on an industrial scale. Syria's cultural heritage sites have been devastated by 4 years of war. Some in the region are battling to save the country's history, but it's oftentimes a life-threatening race against the clock. We traveled to Turkey to meet a Syrian archaeologist who's at the forefront of that fight. He asked that we not show you his face or use his real name, so we'll call him Said. Early in the war, Said was part of a team called the Syrian Heritage Task Force, which sandbagged historic sites like this museum in Mara to protect them from Bashar al-Assad's airstrikes.
It is not a war on our present, that's what I believe. The war is targeting the human being that is alive now, who is also part of a history of roots. So we are fighting on more than one front. I choose to fight on the front that is that of history.
When the Islamic State came in, they took Said's village. He says the punishment for protecting secular objects is now death. Said has moved his wife and 3 children to Turkey, fearing for their safety.
Is your work worth this risk?
There is nothing to gain from this. Most of the time, I don't get money. But at the end of the day, I'm a Syrian citizen, and it's my duty. Some Syrians are fighting the regime, some are fighting against IS. I would rather work in my field, which is protecting antiquities.
While looting is occurring on all sides of the conflict, both the United Nations and the U.S. Treasury Department consider it a source of funding for the Islamic State, which Said says has even established a Bureau of Antiquities. Looters are required to fill out permission forms like this one and hand over a percentage of their proceeds.
So if you want to loot antiquities, you have to buy a license from the Islamic State?
Of course.
And then IS takes a cut, 20% or so?
Of course. If they don't offer any help or equipment, they just take 20%. If they offer help and equipment, they take more, 50%.
Publicly, the group has made a campaign of destroying any un-Islamic cultural relics. 2 months ago, this video surfaced, which appears to show IS fighters destroying priceless artifacts in Iraq's Mosul Museum. It later emerged that some of the pieces were not original.
Do you think that it's a bit for show, that they are actually selling quite a lot of pieces?
For sure. I mean, they destroyed the pieces that we saw, they are destroying, but of course we know that in Mosul Museum we have lots of pieces, and it's very possible that the other pieces were sold on the illicit market.
Dr. Asad Saif is an archaeologist with Lebanon's Directorate General of Antiquities, working with local police to stop the trafficking of illegal antiquities across Syria's border with Lebanon.
How much money have you seen in illicit trafficked antiquities that have come through this museum?
If we calculate the sum of them, we could reach between $5 to $10 million.
It's quite a lot of money.
Quite a lot of money, yes, but not as much as we think it is looted from Syria.
Antiquities are smuggled from Syria through 2 main transit points, Turkey and Lebanon. They're not being sold on the open market, which makes verifying their number difficult. But according to the UN, the scale of looting is enormous. Lebanese authorities say stolen antiquities make their way from here by sea to Cyprus, then on to Turkey, and finally to Europe. Experts believe that objects are most likely going underground to storage facilities and private collections, and they may reappear in several years. Lieutenant Colonel Nicholas Saad leads the investigations on the Lebanese side and knows well the routes and the players involved.
There's the intermediary in Syria. There's the expert who search for the antiquities. There's the smuggler who bring it from Syria to Lebanon. There's the smuggler who have it in Lebanon and take it to the port of Lebanon. And there are others, the smuggler who have the chip to take it to Europe.
This cell phone video shows suspected regime soldiers loading sculptures stolen from Palmyra, the World Heritage Site now under threat by the Islamic State. Smugglers in Beirut were caught after they advertised the statues on the internet for $200,000 apiece.
How often are you busting these guys?
Perhaps once a month.
And before the war, how many times?
Before the war, once every 5, 6 months, 7 months, 8 months, once a year.
Once smugglers are caught, their wares are brought here, to the basement of Lebanon's National Museum, where Dr. Saif's team is in charge of housing and authenticating them.
Here we have lots of fakes that are transported and sold as real objects.
Today, he is preparing to send back a series of genuine religious artifacts from the town of Malula. A UN resolution adopted in 1970 requires that any illicitly trafficked antiquities be returned to their country of origin.
This one is from the 19th century.
So all of these things will go back to the people of Malula.
We're preparing the list in order to send it.
Malula, a Christian village with monasteries going back to the 4th century, where they still speak Aramaic, the language of Jesus. It was seized by the al-Qaeda-linked Jabhat al-Nusra in the fall of 2013, and it remained a battleground between opposition and regime forces for months.
Do you have any concern about sending these pieces back to an unstable area, to a war zone?
It's always difficult to know that a piece could be in a danger zone later, of course, but we have to respect the wish of the country of origin.
It's a scene that Dr. Saif knows all too well. Lebanon was locked in its own bitter civil war from 1975 to 1991.
In Lebanon, we have lived this trauma before. We feel the deep sorrow and the deep feeling of incapacity sometimes, that you are in front of a heritage that is being destroyed and you cannot do anything. It is a very, very hard feeling to have.
In the chaos of war, not even Lebanon's museum was sacred. Militias used it as a military base, even creating a sniper's nest in this 1,500-year-old mosaic. Lebanese archaeologists raced to protect the pieces that couldn't be moved by surrounding them with concrete.
We had armed forces here sometimes inside the museum, so they used to make a small fire in order to make tea or coffee or something like that.
Sarcophagi are now the centerpiece of the National Museum.
All of these marks here,
Our shrapnel marks.
they would have been destroyed,
Yeah, of course.
and they made it.
Yeah, they made it.
But the battle for history in Syria is much harder to fight.
In Lebanon, the conflicting parties were not trying to erase the memory and the past of the other. But in Syria, they are trying to erase all the memory, all the history of the other. And this is very, very dangerous. It's like eradicating the whole past of a community.
And with over 200,000 people killed and almost 12 million people displaced from their homes, a future for Syria is dying alongside its past.
Sometimes the issue of antiquities tortures us more than when Bashar al-Assad strikes with barrel bombs or IS kills, because we can change the conversation and we can rebuild in the future when we get rid of Bashar or IS. But history, we can't remake. This one kills and that one kills. This one destroys civilizations and that one destroys civilizations.
For Saeed, he told me it's pain on top of pain on top of pain. Marcia Biggs for the PBS NewsHour, Beirut.